yes, good morning. My name is JC Cortez, and I'm the Director of Training and Development at the Metropolitan Parent Center here at Synergia. A few words on Synergia. Synergia is a multi-service agency located in Manhattan that has been supporting New Yorkers with disabilities and their families for more than 40 years. We offer a rich source of information and training tailored for parents, including parents whose primary language may not be English or who they themselves may have special training needs. And we help them participate more effectively in their children's education and development. And we partner with professionals and policymakers to improve outcomes for all children with disabilities of all disabilities. Synergia, which is Spanish for synergy, is one of New York City's 3 federally funded parent centers committed to serving people with disabilities and their families with an added focus on communities of color and the economically disadvantaged. Synergia creates innovative programs ranging from transitional housing for homeless families who have children with disabilities to parent classes for adults with intellectual disabilities and parenting and education advocacy training for parents of children with disabilities. So welcome to Synergia and thank you for being here this morning. We're here to talk about transitioning to adulthood and what those principles of inclusion might be. So yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them throughout any point during our presentation. I do ask that if it is of a private nature, to please feel free to reach out privately. Remember, this is being broadcast on the internet and recorded. So if it's something that's more private, please feel free to reach out. You will have my contact information at the end of this presentation. So yes, thank you so much. And I think I got everything else out of the way. So yes, so let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Let me queue up my slides and we'll get going. Okay, so principles of inclusion and transitioning to adulthood. We just spoke about Synergia. Synergia, we do parent trainings, we do special education, one-on-ones, bilingual English, Spanish assistance to help parents resolve special education issues in case you ever find yourself in need. We also have the Autism Initiative, which provides parents and trainings of children with autism, including a special arts program, after school, and a social skills program for young adults. And also we are, as I mentioned, one of the 3 federally funded parent centers here in the New York City region. Our partners include our friends at Advocates for Children of New York, as well as Include NYC. And we also, if you are in Long Island, we have our colleagues at Long Island Advocacy Center. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk about transition, right? And that can look like a lot of different things. So I want to make sure we cover everything. And that's going to include what we should be thinking about for future consideration, right? Understanding what is transition, understanding the process, what are the timelines, who's involved, keys to active parent participation, where can I find what these are, where they are, where can I find them? The statement of needed transition services, what is that? What does it mean? How does it help us? Also, the transition planning versus transition services. Is there a difference? They sound similar, but what is the difference? We also want to understand what the student exit summary is, and then exploring opportunities beyond, right? What happens at age 18, and then tips and suggestions. And because this is such an important topic, I also include like a very comprehensive list of resources for you. You'll get this PowerPoint and all of the resources at the end of this presentation, so no worries there. You don't have to take notes or scribble as quickly as you need to. You'll get a copy of this, and including the resources, which I know are of high value. So when we're considering our child's future, right, we want to think, well, what are our hopes and dreams for our child once they complete high school? What does that look like? What are they going to need? How can we support them? And like we always ask ourselves, like, what is that going to look like? And we can always think about that. I get a lot of questions, like, when is a good time to look? And honestly, like, it's never a bad time to think about these things. I'll have some more tips and suggestions for you at the end, but you can start thinking about these things as your child, is growing up, no matter what age. So, like, oh, they really like trains. They like taking things apart. They like putting them back together. They really don't like certain things. They do love certain things. They're really good at math. Um, and these are things that we can think about as we think about what our hopes and dreams are for our children. What do they want to do, right? Have they told us? Have they said anything? Do they have any idea? Maybe they don't know. Maybe they're too young, so they're not thinking about that. Also, how can you help your child prepare for employment or post-secondary education? Post-secondary education doesn't necessarily mean a four-year university. It can mean trade school. It can mean something for vocational training. And also, what about independent living, right? So they're not, do they want to live on their own? Is that something that they can do? And how can we support them to have the skills that they're going to need to do that? Also, how can you be a more effective advocate for your child during the transition process? Are you letting them speak up for themselves? Are you letting them speak and express what they want? What have they told you? Have you shared that with the IEP team, with the transition team? What can you do to teach your child to be a self-advocate, right? We want to be able, for our children to be able at some point, to express, hey, I have this disability and this is what that means. These are my needs. So that, whenever we're not around, if they can speak up for themselves, that they can, and that they can do it in a way that is of value to them. Unfortunately, we don't live forever, and we want our children to be as prepared as they can for life after high school, right? So these are things we should be considering. So what does transition entail? What's in it? So I copied and pasted really what it is according to the IDEA, which is the Individual for Disabilities Education Act. And this is federal law that dictates all of special education, right? And it says transition services mean a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability. And that is designed to be results oriented, improvement on academic, functional achievement, also things related to post-secondary activities, right? Vocational education, integrated employment, continuing adult education, right? Adult services, what that might look like, independent living, and community participation. Because we also have to remember IDEA, IEPs don't follow after high school, right? So what can we do to prepare for all of the things afterwards? Also, it's going to take into account the child's individual needs and their child's strengths, their preferences, their interests. That also includes area of instruction. How do they learn best? Related services. What services do they need? Where do we need to really beef up related services, right? And preparing them for life after high school, because they won't receive these related services once they are out of high school. Community experiences. How can we ensure that community experiences are always there, right? Because there's more to life than just grades and homework. So how do we make sure that we're fulfilling different aspects of happiness for our children? Also, development of employment or living objectives. Maybe they want to work, maybe they can work, maybe they can't work. So what does that look like? And also, if it's appropriate, getting those daily living skills that we need, and understanding what our child's aptitudes might be for the future through vocational assessments or through just us talking together and really discussing what those daily living skills need to be. I'll give you an example. A parent told me that they wanted their child to be able to do laundry. So that's something, a daily independent living skill, right? Learning how to put on your clothes, how to brush your teeth, those things. Maybe we take them for granted. However, I can assure you not everybody does. So these are things that, we have to think about as well. So are there timelines and who's involved? There are always timelines and there's always somebody involved, right? But who are they? So for transition, New York state laws says that transition services need to be on a child's IEP no later than when the child is 15. All right. So, and it can be younger if it's deemed appropriate, but it must be updated annually thereafter. So at 15 in New York State, no matter where you live in New York State, IEP transition services will be listed on the child's IEP. Now, for those of us, that's the majority, that live here in New York City, that transition planning begins when a student turns 12 years old. All right. Notice I said transition planning, not transition services. We'll talk about what the difference is in a minute. But yes, so when a student turns 12, then at that point, we'll start discussing transition planning um, until the student graduates or until the student turns 21. Now, planning responsibility is the school-based transition planning team. And this team, it sounds like another team, and I apologize for that. It's the same members of the IEP team that you've been working with throughout your child's life, right? Throughout their high school career at this point, probably. And yes, and it may include the participation of other agencies. So what other agencies would be participating, we might wonder. So the IEP team may ask for your consent to invite a representative of an agency that can help provide or pay for transition services. Um, Maybe there are some transition needs that the school can't provide, right? Maybe your child is uniquely gifted in music and really wants to focus on a career transitioning into music. So maybe we find an agency or a nonprofit here in the city that helps with that or that can help be useful in that. And then we're like, hey, you know what? Hey, mom, hey, dad, can we invite this agency? We think that'd be really beneficial from what we've heard. Also, if you know somebody, if you're already working with an agency that has been helping you with your child or that's working directly with your child in their goals, you can bring them to the table too. Remember, you can always bring somebody to an IEP meeting that is supporting your child. You just need to give them notice and say, hey, you know what? This person is going to be joining us for today's meeting. Another example that might be useful, if you have a child with an intellectual disability or developmental disability, you can bring somebody from OPWDD, right? Maybe somebody from the coordinated care agency. You can bring that person so that they can discuss those needs too. All of this is to provide supports for your child so that they can transition successfully after high school. So yes, also there is a transition linkage coordinator, and they're at every school and certainly in every district. And they're there to ensure that there's an appropriate transition in IEP planning for all students. They can also serve as a contact for outside agencies to help certain students with applications or transition activities. So if you need extra help, like, hey, my son wants to transition into this and this and this place, that coordinator can be really helpful in connecting the two of you and making sure everything is going according to plan. So more on timelines, right? At age 12, we said the New York City Department of Education starts doing planning, transition planning. How does that look like? In this case, in New York City, it looks like a level 1 vocational assessment. And that is completed for students who have turned 12 during the summer. Also, once it's done, it's reviewed and updated every year at the IEP team meeting. So what's in it? What's in the box? We want to know. So there's a student interview, right? We want to determine interests, needs, preferences, skills, and abilities. Then how is that done? A member of the transition team, which is simply put the IEP team, is going to use a verbal interview, a written interview, or picture icons so that the student can touch and point to, or assessment tools based on the student's ability, right? So whichever one of these is best for the student is the one that will probably be used. And that can look like a number of formats. So there's some flexibility here, but we want to be able to get the most amount of answers to what we're trying to assess. In this case, their vocational assessment. There's also an interview with the parent, and that's done in the parent's preferred language, usually done either in person or on the phone. Now everything's done through Zoom as well, so that's a possibility as well. Also, teacher interview. There's also a teacher interview / questionnaire for teachers that have been working with our students, right? So this teacher will go through their records. They'll also provide assessments and what they think would be beneficial. And they'll look at all of this based on the student's level of performance as well. A quick note. So I mentioned level 1, which is suggestive or implies that there are other levels. There are other levels. There is a level 2 and there is a level 3. Typically, what is always administered is a level 1. However, if we're not getting enough information from a level 1 to really make transition plans and determine what transition services should be, then we can ask for a level 2. And if that's not giving us enough, we can still ask for a level 3. You're well within your right to ask for these. So if you're not getting enough information, say maybe the child just actually doesn't know how to express it, doesn't have the vocabulary to express what they want, maybe we take it deeper and we go with a level 2. For a lot of students that don't speak, maybe a level 2 or a level 3 is actually the appropriate place to start. So whatever, if we're not satisfied with what we're getting from a level 1, there is the level 2 and level 3 option. All right. And it's just more intensive. That's all it is. It's just more intensive. It just does more work to get the same information. That may be through an additional evaluation or an assessment or aptitude test. It looks different, but yes, those options are there for you. So yes, so we start doing that at age 12. And at age 14, the IEP team is going to discuss transition at the IEP meeting. And they'll do that at every IEP meeting after that. Transition will always be subject of discussion for part of the meeting once the child turns 14. And the student will also be invited to the IEP meeting to discuss transition services. They're not going to be there to discuss what you're getting, what you're not getting. However, they are going to be there to go ahead and support you and say, all right, we would like to hear from the student on what their goals are, what they're thinking about, how they want to get there. We want to ask the student directly, what do you think would be a good fit for you? What doesn't work for you? So that's an opportunity for that to happen. So yes, I think I saw, let's see. I thought I saw somebody raise their hand. If you would like to ask a question, please place it in the chat or Q&A box so that we can read them from there and have a record. But yes, let me see. Just make sure. Okay, I don't see anything. All right, perfect. At age 15, as you recall, New York State requires that all of those transition services now need to be added onto the IEP. So at age 15 on the IEP, that school year, transition services will be listed. They have to be listed at this point because now it's a compliance matter between state law. But remember, in New York City, at 12, we're going to start having those conversations. So from ages 12 to 14, we might not have anything actually on the IEP, but we are already having the discussion. So if there's nothing on your child's IEP yet, and they're between ages 12 and 14, that's actually okay. Those services don't have to be included until the age of 15, right? Because at that point, we only have 3 years to get out of school. So that's definitely something we want to look at and consider. So what are some keys to active parent participation? So the benefit of having parents serve on a transition team or the IEP team is that you can help the team pinpoint specific skills needed by your children. So your child wants to be a firefighter. Maybe they need to beef up in terms of strength. Maybe they need to get better hand and eye coordination. So these are things that we can already kind of think about, like, oh yeah, my son really wants to work on trains. This is something that we can start thinking about, like, okay, what parts of trains, right? Because there are a total number of components to a train. So what does that look like? So we can help identify what those specific skills are. I see a question in the Q&A. Where would I find this information in the IEP? I'm so glad you asked. We will discuss that in just a few minutes. Thank you. So, yes, parents also need to be active in collaborating on school curriculum to ensure that their children will have appropriate options available to them when they leave school. So maybe we're not all teachers, right? But we know our child best. Nobody can take that away from us. So how would we ensure that we're being active on school curriculum? Well, let's say, for example, your child is a visual learner. And not somebody who can just listen to things, right? They need to see it. So if we have a program that the school is proposing or an outside agency partner, and they say, oh, well, all of it's going to be done by listening to a podcast, just for argument's sake, then us as parents were like, hey, actually, no, my son is a visual learner and needs to see things. So I don't think that's gonna work. I'm not the teacher here, but I know my child is a visual learner. That's an example where you're participating in supporting the school curriculum. Also, if you know your child likes to touch things, is a tactile learner, then that's something for you to say as well. Parents should also share information with school personnel about a student and family's needs, activities, and goals. These are always changing. We have different family needs, as we've realized throughout the pandemic. Our needs have changed substantially, right? Oh, I actually need to prioritize this now as opposed to 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. So, we need to share that information. Hey, you know what? My family is thinking about this, and these are our needs right now, and this is what we're doing because of the pandemic or a different extenuating circumstance. I need your team to know this so that you can support us where we are and what we need. Also, parents should participate in selecting goals, and the kinds of learning experiences that you want your children to have, and the kinds of skills that they're going to be taught. You know what your child needs. And maybe you don't know everything that there is to know about the world, but you also know, like, hey, after my child is out of high school, they're going to need to be able to do this and this and this. So you say to the IEP team, hey, my child is going to need to know this better. Maybe they need to learn how to take public transportation before they leave high school. So that's something that we can put on the radar of the school and help with that. If we're not already getting help from outside agencies. Also, parents need to work with professionals and other parents to develop more appropriate options where service gaps exist. You can work with professionals that you're working with outside of the school. We know from a personal experience, it takes a village. So, if there are other professionals that can help you, talk to them. Hey, pediatrician, do you know anything that would be good for my child that's doing after school art programs? Oh, sure. At Center here, they have this after school art program. Ask agencies that you work with, ask our partners. If you work with Include NYC or Advocates of New York, we all work together and, hey, maybe what they're not doing is something that we have, and vice versa. So you can ask. Where do I find transition related activities? This was just the question that we got, and couldn't be more timely. So in short, you're going to find this information on the child's IEP, the Individualized Education Program. But where? The IEP is like 30 pages. Where? So here are 3 sections where you will definitely find information related to transition related activities. So you'll find them in the measurable post-secondary goals, and that includes areas of training, education, employment, and if appropriate, independent living skills, right? Maybe that laundry. Also annual goals that must be based on age-appropriate transition assessments, annual goals that document also the knowledge and skills that the student is expected to achieve during that 10-month period that will ultimately help prepare them for post-secondary goals. An IEP must include also a statement of needed transition services after the child is 12 years old that describes all of the activities and strategies that are going to lead to the desired outcomes after high school. And we also identify who's responsible for providing them. We need accountability in these IEPs, right? So that's something that's going to be built into it. Here's a question. Please correct me if I'm misunderstanding. If IEPs are not used after high school, why add all this important information? Are there other documents as adults that can be used? That's a great question, and I'm going to leave that question up because we're going to talk about that at the end. But yes, it's important because one, when the child is 12 years old, we need to already have a plan. So every year every year after 12 is another year of added planning that we're going to be providing for that child, right? So 12 years old, typically we're like in the last year of middle school. And then at 13, we're in high school. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, we're about to graduate is the typical track. However, if the child stays after 18, they can stay in up until the age of 21. If they haven't met all of their graduation requirements, that's definitely allowed. And those are extra years where we get to plan. Those are extra years where we get to think about strategies and interventions. Maybe last year's interventions didn't work. We have another year to do that. So that's why it's important to include all of this in an IEP, because it gives us also a history of what is being used and what worked, what didn't work, what kind of had okay results. So all of this information is important because it creates a record. And whenever the IEP is finished, or whenever the student completes their education career in high school, then that there will be a transition statement that will be provided that'll show all of this information. So it's not a bad question at all, Ms. Melendez. Thank you for asking. So here, what I've done is that I've shown you a blank IEP, a template, right? And this is where we see the need for transition related activities. These are those three sections that I was talking to about just now in the previous slide. So we see the measurable post-secondary goals here at the top in the middle, and it shows us long-term goals for living, working, and learning as an adult. It also shows us education, training, employment, independent living skills where appropriate, transition needs, what are we considering for course of study. Also, those coordinated set of transition activities, all of that's here too. We see here on the left side at the bottom, instruction, related services, community experiences, development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, acquisition of daily living skills. It shows us the service or the activity that will be done, and it'll show us who's also responsible. If it's the school district or an outside agency, it'll show us that. Yes, so this is where you're going to find it. You're going to find this in the IEP, in those sections. You might not know where to find an IEP off the top of your head, and that's okay. Sometimes we keep good copies, sometimes we don't. Sometimes things change and we need an extra copy. If you don't know where to find it digitally, all of you should have access through your child's New York City Schools account, which is also referred to as the NYCSA account. Every student in New York City, whether they're in public school or private school or charter school, has a New York City Schools account, and it will have all of this information. So you have information. So if you have 2 students, right, you'll have 2 students listed. You can add another one if you have others. You have my students, so how you can get all their information. You have forms that might be convenient for you to sign. Also, Parent University is a tool that the New York City Department of Education uses to give free courses and give activities so that people can understand additional needs, and they're provided directly by DOE officials. Also, you have another option here to report bullying in case you don't know where to go. Also, this can change up to the last year of high school, correct? Transition needs can always change. Transition needs are always evolving. So that's a great question. Transition needs are always evolving, so they can change. They should change. I mean, what's appropriate for your child when they were 12 is different from what's appropriate for your child when they're 18. So yes, they should and will change. Where else can you find transition related activities? You know, in the IEP, you can find them. Also, you can find them in the NYCSA account. So in the NYCSA account, you're going to be able to find grades, assessments, what evaluations have been done, or you'll see the reading level, what the current reading level is, where it has been. You'll see a graduation tracker, which is really important for all of you parents of budding adults to have. Are they meeting their graduation requirements? Where are they in their track to graduate? You know, because once the child graduates, they no longer have an IEP. Once the child ages out, once they turn 21, they no longer have an IEP, right? So graduation tracker is always something I would always familiarize myself with. Also, student documents. What documents exist for my student? Attendance record. An attendance record is there. Transportation. It will describe all transportation needs that you may have, and then that your student may have, rather, and also student wellness. So here's a statement of needed transition services. What areas must be included? So it must include instruction-related services, community experiences, employment or post-school adult living objectives, daily living skills, and functional vocational evaluation. So instruction, right? And this should already be happening in an IEP, is like, where does this instruction take place? Is it take place in a classroom? Is it in a small group? Is it outside the classroom? Is it one-to-one? Is it in private schools? Is it in public schools? Is it happening at home? Also, related services. In addition to regular services, District 75 students can access travel training. Travel training is teaching a student how to travel or between the home and the school only, at least within the DOE. There are programs that exist outside the DOE for travel training, such as YAI, that spend about twice as much time just teaching them how not only to navigate to school, but also to navigate to other places. So that's something that can be considered. Community experiences, what can be provided by communities, whether it's by schools or consultants, private providers, other agencies, right? You'll find that there are plenty of organizations and nonprofits in literally every neighborhood across New York City that are doing something where your child can volunteer or be a part of. Employment, post-school adult living objectives, whether maybe they want to work, maybe they really want to earn money, and maybe they have that ability, and why should we deprive them of that? So what are those objectives, right? How can we help them obtain those good work habits, right? So it's like being on time, having a good attitude, being a team player and not an individual player. How can we help them get those skills, right? Maybe it's through an internship. The Department of Education and the City of New York have paired together over the past few years to provide summer internships to students of all abilities and disabilities. So that's an option. Here at Synergia, I just had the great privilege of having 9 amazing interns. And they were working diligently, some with IEPs. So, I mean, there's definitely places for all children. We just have to figure out what they are and what they look like, right? So yes. And yeah, and if the IEP team, including the student and the parents, agree, if you guys all agree that maybe you don't need to list anything on one of these 5 areas, then there has to be a statement that says, we all agree nothing should be on this line, and then provide a reason. There always has to be a reason in an IEP. Why are we doing this, or why are we not doing this? If we considered it and we didn't choose to do it, why not? We need to understand that. So that's something that needs to be there. Also, if a student is OPWDD eligible, we can recommend that they participate in the IEP meetings as well. They being the OPWDD coordinated care person, right? So we want to include them so that they can also provide us with, some insight into what's going to be provided. Will I have access to this if my child attends a New York State funded school? Will you have access to all of this information? I'm not sure if you're referring, Ms. Reyes, to the information that will be in the IEP, or if you're talking about a NICSA account. If the NICSA account, if your child is a New York City student and the IEP team has referred them to a New York State funded school, if that is the case, which does happen, then you will have a NICSA account. If you have privately placed your student in a private school or a New York State funded school, it depends where they are located. It just depends who placed the student there, whether you'll have it. But you should always, no matter what, whether you have a NICSA account or not, you will always have the IEP, and all of this information has to be included in an IEP, regardless of where you live in New York State. The DOE webpage, how do I get access to that account? So I'll be providing you with this PowerPoint, and you can review the PowerPoint on your own. I did include, if you'll notice here, the web address for the NICSA account, which is right here. So you'll have that, and you can click on it once I send it. So you'll have this information soon enough. Transition planning, right? So what is transition planning versus transition services? Transition planning is assisting students and their families to think about life after high school and identifying long-term goals. So this is just like the planning process, right? We know our child's going to be an adult, turn of age. And so what do we need to think about? This is our moment to think of the big question, how? How do we prepare them? How do we get them there? So this process includes many elements of planning for the future with the goal of investing in the student's well-being. For example, vocational assessments will help us to understand a student's interests and abilities in job-related areas. Also, information collected from a student, also a parent or a teacher. We also can refer to school records. So that's what the transition planning is. Um, and yeah, so that's where we go with that. Um, Give me 1 second so I can just make sure we're doing okay on with our friends on Facebook. Um, Let me see. All right, I don't see any questions there yet. Let me just refresh the page. Okay. Oh, goodness. All right. Okay. And yes, so we'll continue. Transition services. So transition services are different from transition planning, right? So we did the planning to determine what the services should be. So transition services, like we said, are going to be those coordinated set of activities to support children with individuals with disabilities, children with disabilities rather, excuse me, and discover their needs, their strengths, their preferences and interests. It'll also include the instruction, related services, the community experiences. And New York State says we have to consider these 10 areas. We have to consider not only their education, but also legal aspects, advocacy, personal independence, residential services, recreation and leisure, finances, income, medical aspects, healthcare, employment, transportation, post-secondary education, whether they're continuing on to college or university, or whether they're going on to just get a GED in case they didn't get their complete their high school diploma requirements. And then we have to consider anything else that we can do to provide support. So this is something that we were talking about earlier. So why do all of this? And if the IEP isn't good after high school, why do we need all of this information? Why add all this additional information, right? So are there other documents that can be used? So Ms. Melendez, this is answering your question specifically. So every IEP in the last year of the student's time in high school, they will get what is called a student exit summary. IDEA, the federal law, requires that school districts provide a summary of the student's academic achievement and functional performance during their child's final year of high school. And that's whether they're graduating from high school because they completed all the requirements, or whether the student is simply aging out. And when you turn 21, you are no longer eligible to go to school. There have been a couple of exceptions these last 2 years because of the pandemic. And they have said that if your student has not graduated by the time they're 21 and they still want to continue their education, they can continue for another year. So if your student is 21 during the past 2 years, there is the ability to still continue for them being in school to complete their graduation requirements. They haven't said anything for this last year. I am assuming they will, considering what they've done in the past couple of years, but I can't speak for them and they haven't said it yet, but I would imagine they will. Now, what's in this student exit summary, right? All right, so you do this the last year of the student being in school, but what is it? So it has to include the student's abilities, their skills, the needs and limitations. It also has to provide recommendations to support successful transition to their goals after high school, whether that's adult living, adult services, helpful supports after school, learning and working, right? So this document will be so helpful. It'll also be based off a fresh set of evaluations typically, so that it gives us the best idea of everything that we need to know before this child no longer gets these free evaluations, before this child no longer has an IEP. So this will give us the best idea, and we can then use it. And we can use it to provide to, if the child is going on to say continue studying, right? Then we can give it to the child, that school's disability office, and say, these are the disabilities, this is the disability of my child and their needs. This is their exit summary. What can you provide for him? Because that way they can understand, like, hey, this has been documented. This has been proven to work with this student. This has not been proven to work with this student. Maybe we can try new methods if we have them for this student. So that's why this is all important to have. And we always want to include it. So that way, whenever you get this exit summary, you can present it to a child's future school. If they're going into the workplace, it'll also be helpful for them too. Like, hey, how do I support this individual in integrating them into the workplace? Maybe they need to take a break every 30 minutes. Maybe they need something that we can provide them. So you'll remember that here in the United States, we cannot discriminate based on disability. So, if a person with a disability wishes to work and they have the qualifications, a disability cannot discriminate against them. So this document will also be helpful for that student or future worker. So yes, the goal at the end of the day is to assist the student in establishing eligibility for reasonable accommodations and supports, whether that's in whatever the post-secondary setting might be. It might be the workplace, it might be the community, it might be accessing adult services, right? So this will be really helpful as well. So yes, I hope that answered your question, Ms. Melendez. And if you have any others, please feel free to ask. So now that we have that exit summary, what else exists beyond high school, right? Typically, you're going to hear so many preparing for college, preparing for university, but maybe that's not what post-secondary life looks like for our child. We know that, like, maybe that's just not something they want to do right now. Maybe it's something that they want to do, but we need to figure out additional supports. So it's thinking about all of those things. What's best for my child? You know your child best. And maybe that includes vocational education, which is training for a job that doesn't require a college degree, right? Or maybe it requires only a 2-year certificate or a 1-year certificate. Maybe the person wants to be a hairstylist or a barber or a nail technician. Maybe they want to do something working with cars, right? For that student who's really great with trains and putting them apart and assembling them, all of that, maybe that's something for them. So vocational education is an option. Adult education is a program that provides services to people who are 16 years of age and older that are not in school or college. And that can look like getting your GED, which is the high school equivalency. It can also look like vocational programs, right? So it can look like a number of things. Also, adult services and community services, those are any supports or services which disabled adults are eligible for. So maybe this would be OPWDD, right? That would be something that they have the eligibility for a lifetime to receive all of these supports, like rehabilitation, respite services for the providers. And that's what that might look like. And then lastly, independent living skills and community participation. So including life skills training, right? Counseling and advocacy, other areas where that might allow an adult with a disability to live and work within the community and as independently as possible. I'm so glad, Ms. Melendez, thank you. So yes, so those are those are non-traditional paths, and that's quite all right. As we're learning more like survival throughout the pandemic, we've realized, that maybe college isn't the best yield for our students. Maybe they need different types of training. So, consider all the things put all the options on the table. So what happens at age 18? Under IDEA, the federal law that dictates special education, states are required to notify students as to what their rights will be when they reach the age of majority, which is 18 years old. So you'll receive a notification from the state of New York saying, hey, student, you're about to turn 18. These are what your rights are going to be. These are what your responsibilities as a citizen will be. And also at the age of 18, parents, your rights will be transferred to the student, and you will be liberated from parental control. They will be liberated from parental control, rather. you will also be liberated from your responsibilities as for your child as well. So at age 18, parents, you are no longer obligated to send your child to school as you would have before. So if your child decides at age 18 and there's no other agreement like a guardianship or supported decision-making agreement that exists, then you no longer, if your child decides, I don't want to go to school anymore, they're well within their right. If, um, but yes, but if you have like another type of arrangement, which we're about to talk about, then that might look a little differently for you and your family. So yes, also at age 18, it's important to recognize that all males, all men in the United States, when they turn 18, have to register for what is called selective service. Selective service is a law that goes back to the 1960s, and it was created for the draft, for so whenever the United States didn't have enough soldiers for going to war, um, it was created then. It still exists. We've never used it again, thankfully. Hopefully we never do, but it's still required of all males to complete registration for selective service when they turn 18. You can do that at any post office. You can also do it online. And all it is saying, I am, JC Cortez, age 18, and I am completing my duty to register for selective service. It doesn't mean that they're going to go to war. It doesn't mean that anybody's going to be drafted. And at the end of the day, if we ever had to use that, it would, they still go individual by individual saying, hey, can you serve? If not, why not? Oh, I have a disability. Oh, okay. And then, they're fine. But it's important to complete this because if you don't complete registration for selective service, you jeopardize risking receiving government benefits. You risk benefits that include like SSI, SSDI. You can risk losing your eligibility for student loans. Um, Not that anybody would want those, right? But hey, those are things that you put at risk whenever you don't sign up for selective service. So it's important to complete that step. Um, and like I said, I mean, if we ever use it in the future again, I'm it's pretty sure like they would treat each individual as to like, hey, why can't you serve? Oh, I have a disability. Okay, never mind. And you're okay. So it's something that has to be done, and it's something that has to be said, and it needs to be reminded because a lot of people forget that. And then you find yourself, losing benefits or trying to like fight for your benefits because you didn't sign up for selective service, which is so simple. It literally takes less than 5 minutes. But yes, for long-term decisions, hold on, I see some questions. Is vocational training for free? Vocational training can be for free. It depends what you're doing. So vocational training, so for example, if you're going to trade school to learn how to become like a beauty stylist or a hairstylist, a nail technician, that probably isn't going to be for free. But there is certain types of vocational training. There are certain types rather that do exist. Are they for free? It just depends. It depends if you also gain eligibility, right? One of those things is called Access VR, which can provide support for getting vocational training. If you find yourself eligible for Access VR, then typically you'll receive additional benefits that can support you in vocational training. So yes, maybe, no. It depends. Under what age are vocational services provided? Vocational services can be provided for any age as long as the student is out of high school. And typically, I mean, unless they're doing an internship, then maybe they can get those vocational services. But typically it's like 16 and above when a child is no longer in college or high school. Thank you for that question. Let's see, Miss Maxwell. I have a unique question. My son did not develop his disability, which gives him mobility challenges, until he was 14 and enrolled in an independent boarding school in New Jersey, and there wasn't an IEP ever set up. He has transitioned into college out of state with a live-in aide, and we are currently assisted through Access VR in New York to support his development for future employment. Once he graduates in 3 years and becomes employed, are there organizations that will assist him in finding an affordable, accessible residence for him and a live-in aid in New York City? So this is a very unique question, but thank you for it. If there was never an IEP set up, that's actually okay. Let's see, until he was 14. How old is the student now, Ms. Maxwell? 19. Okay. All right. So now that the student is of age, then yeah. So this is going to be really important. I'm not sure. It doesn't sound like it's an intellectual or developmental disability. It sounds like a mobility disability. So in those cases, are there organizations that can assist him? They're not going to be the same way that like a school would with an exit transition summary. But it's important for you to have documented as much as you can. And also hopefully these other institutions that he's been working with have documentation of that so that they can provide a summary whenever you do need to seek these organizations. There's an organization I have listed in the resource list, which is called the Center for the Independently Disabled. I believe that's correct. SID New York. And they help a lot of self-advocates obtain what they need. So that might be really helpful. There's also, let me see, there is something available. Let me see. Disabled people with a live-in aid can also request an extra bedroom with the appropriate medical verification. I received your question in the pre-registration questions and sent it over to our housing department, housing advocacy department, and that was what they were able to share with me. So he can request an extra bedroom if there is a live-in aid, provided there is medical documentation. But yes, as to who could help you, probably legal aid society, probably Advocates for Children, and also SID New York. So yes, that should be helpful. Question, can you send me the form or where? Ms. Palacios, I'm not sure to which form you're referring. Are you referring to the selective service form? If so, I can share the website. Absolutely. All right, let's keep going. So yes, so these are things that we need to consider. For also, I mentioned long-term decisions, right? We need to think about long-term as well. Parents need to decide whether they want to get involved in the guardianship process. And this might be considered or discussed when the child is 17. I would actually move that up earlier to maybe when the child is 15 or 16, if that's what you're thinking. Because honestly, if you want to explore these options, it's going to take time and you don't want to do something like this very rushed. Guardianship takes away all rights of an individual and it leaves it to the guardian, whether to give permission at any point for what they want to complete, or what the person with the person under that guardianship has to do. So if you have a child, say, that is able to make decisions and just needs guidance, then maybe a guardianship isn't the best option, right? We don't want to take away all rights if the student has the ability to take some of those rights. So how can we do that in the least, kind of in the spirit of least restrictive environment? How can we do that so that we can support our individual in the most that we can without taking away all their rights? Sometimes that is going to be a guardianship, and sometimes it can be just supported decision-making. Supported decision-making is a new thing, a new option that has been developing over the past few years. I'm happy to inform you that now it is legal, it is legalized here in New York State. So if you don't want to take away all those rights and your student seems capable of making decisions for themselves and you just need to give them that extra support, maybe supported decision-making is a better option. Let me see if we have a follow. Yes. Okay. Yes, I will share with you the selective service link for sure. So yes, so those are things we want to consider long term, right? And I say start thinking about that when the child's 15 or 16, because there are very few organizations in the city of New York that provide that type of service in filling out the paperwork. The paperwork is very long, but it's very repetitive. And it's so repetitive that you might get confused. There are different tools through the courts, through the family courts that provide guidance in filling out that paperwork. But if you want somebody to walk you through it, not the only agency, but the biggest agency that provides that support is AHRC, and they have had a 2-year waiting list. So if you want to start thinking about this, start thinking about it around 15 or 16 in case you're going to ask for their help in filling that out. Otherwise, I would follow the guidance of the court. The court has like a tool, an electronic tool that helps you fill it out as you're going along. It's available in English and Spanish, I know for sure. I'm not sure of other languages, but that assistant is there for you. How do we go about signing for supported decision making? That's a great question. Oh, so supported decision making. Yeah, no. So I actually share the information for supported decision making New York, which is the organization that has typically been helping people connect to that. And it's in the resource list. But yes, that's a great question. So tips and suggestions. We're down to the wire. We're almost down to the end of our meeting. And so yeah, so start thinking about your child's transition to post-secondary opportunities when they're in middle school. I mean, it's never too early, but middle school is definitely when you definitely really need to start thinking about this. Why? Because remember, at age 12, we're going to start having those conversations. We're going to start doing those evaluations and assessments. So yeah, so think about it like that. Also, successful planning may include different things. It might be identifying support services. It might be involving adult service agencies. So, right, what is that going to look like? For those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, OPWDD is that adult service agency, right? But what if my child doesn't have those? What does that look like? Is there any help? Typically, I would look for organizations that work with a specific type of disability and see what else is available. And I would look on a state level and then a city level as well. Also, and this is so important, teaching your child self-advocacy skills, teaching them how to say, this is my disability. And because of this disability, I might not be able to do this or this or this, but if you provide me with these supports, I'm in a better position to do them, right? So we want to be able to leave our children in the best way so that they can also speak about their disability, speak about what their needs are, and advocate for themselves in whenever we're not there, right? And that might not be something morbid like after we've passed away, but it might be something, something like, hey, my child at school and needs to make a decision and needs to tell somebody, like, hey, I have this disability, I really can't do this, or if you help me with this, I can do it this. We need to be able to give our child those skills so that they can speak up for themselves, right? So yeah, and it also might look like something less formal, right? Maybe they're not at school, maybe they're not at work and they need to tell somebody, but maybe they're on a date or maybe they're on a friend date and they find themselves, like, hey, the need to share and disclose. We never know what that's going to look like, but we need our children to be able to do it to the best of their ability, because eventually we won't be here, right, to support them. So it's never too early to do that. So yes, so now we're going to go through resources. As I mentioned to you, we're one of the 3 federally funded parent centers here in the city of New York. There are federally funded parent centers across the entire United States and the territories. So here in New York State, that might be Advocates for Children. It might be Community Inclusion and Development Alliance, which works in Queens, especially supporting the Korean community. We have Include NYC, amazing hub of information. Long Island Advocacy Center for our friends that find themselves in Long Island, Nassau County. Parent Network of Western New York. Those serve like the western half of New York State. So if you live in any of these counties, they were a great resource. Also, Synergia, you've already found. We serve the 5 boroughs. Starbridge serves all of New York State except New York City and Long Island. So if you live outside of New York City or Long Island, you could probably contact them. And also United We Stand of New York and Brooklyn. So also in this resource list, the Department of Education's Family Guide to Transition Planning. I've placed the links available here in English, Spanish, and Chinese, but it is available in all 9 languages of the Department of Education. Also, the Transition College Access Center here in Manhattan. Every borough has their own, but the Manhattan one has a lot of more resources I've found. So I would recommend you check them out. The New York City Department of Education's After High School Guide, that's available right here. Also, information on vocational services is provided in the 4th link here for the P through 12 office. Access VR, which stands for Adult Career and Continuing Education Services, excuse me, and Vocational Rehabilitation. That's done through the New York State Department of Education. You can access them here. Also, the Social Security Administration, if you don't understand the difference between SSI and SSDI, disability benefits, you can check out their website there. Also, to learn more about Medicaid and Medicare, you can check them out there. There's also the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities, the Center for Independence of the Disabled. That's the organization I was looking to share with you. So that's the SID New York. Also, Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, OPWDD. The Office of Mental Health for supports and day services for adults with severe psychiatric disabilities. And then there's the self-advocates of New York State. So, you know, like if you have a disability and you want to be advocating on your own behalf as a part of a group, the self-advocates of New York State is an amazing organization that can help people with disabilities get their voice out and help make a difference in changing legislation. Also, Project Shine. Synergia is a member of Project Shine, and Project Shine is a group of organizations, 7 organizations here in New York City, and we are developing tools for both young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as parents, their parents and caregivers, and how they can discuss sexuality, understanding topics of consent, understanding more about what your body parts are doing, what their function is. Because unfortunately, whether we like it or not, our children keep growing, and so do they also keep developing biologically, physically, mentally, emotionally, and sexually. So we want to make sure that our students, our young ones and loved ones, you know, have a better idea of how to advocate for themselves when it comes to those topics. Lastly, there are plenty of parent groups on Facebook and social media, WhatsApp as well. No matter where you go, you're always going to find them. A word of caution, just in the era of disinformation that we live in now, keep in mind to verify information before you accept it as truth. If you feel like there's something of concern to you and you want to verify that, you can call a parent center, and you know we can tell you, provide you better information around that topic, so that you don't feel like, wait, I saw this in a chat room on Facebook, and all of a sudden, like, wait, what is it? So yeah, so think about those things. But yes, so now we're down to the official Q&A section of our meeting. So please, if you have any questions that I haven't answered so far, please, now is the time. I'm happy to answer your questions. And yes, please, we keep all of this information on our Facebook so that you can access it at any point. Same thing for our YouTube. But yes, that information will be available. If you need to reach out for any of our services, please reach out to Synergia. Thank you so much, Ms. Melendez. I'm so glad this information was informative. And yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is part of the Apple Academy that we do here at Synergia. Apple stands for Academy for Parents Providing Leadership and Education. We will be launching our fifth cohort of the Apple Academy in November. This will be the first cohort that we offer only in English. So if you're an English speaker, this will be the perfect time for you to do it. It's a series of 7 courses, 2-hour courses that you do typically with me. And I will share with you all the ins and outs of special education, law, your rights. But yes, as a part of that series, we offer 4 of the 7 courses to the general public, whether they want refreshers or if they need more information, that's also available. But yes, we do offer 4 of those 7 courses to the general public. And yes, we will offer the next cohort in English only, November 2nd, I believe. You can contact our outreach department, intake department, and they can take care of that and get you on the sign-up list for the next cohort. The next Spanish cohort will be in April of 2023. So yes, unless we find some way to do it sooner, that is the soonest we can offer the Spanish again. So yes, so thank you everybody, and thank you so much. Will the recording be sent and the slides? Absolutely. I will send over the recording and the slides by the end of today. I will try to have it. I just got a notification from Facebook during our presentation that I violated some copyright by Harry Styles, I guess. But yes, it will be available on Facebook, the recording, if not today, once we can get that Harry Styles edited out, we'll add that. Who do I contact for the next cohort? Thank you, Ms. Reyes. Yes, so for the next cohort, you're going to want to contact our intake department, and intake can take care of all of that. And you just tell them you want to sign up for the next Apple Academy and tell them whether you want that in English or Spanish, and they'll connect you through. I'll put that in the chat right now. And that's the easiest way to contact our intake department. So yes, so if there are any other questions, thank you for your time in putting this together. I'm sure I'm speaking for all of us when I say that this was very helpful. Thank you so much, Ms. Linus. And yes, I'm so happy to do it, and it's always great connecting with you guys. Thank you so much for rescheduling. Apologize for any inconvenience with the reschedule, but yes. So I'll go ahead and activate that poll. And yeah, it's just 9 quick questions. Thank you so much, everybody. If you have anything else, please follow up with me. I'm happy to be a resource to you. But yes, thank you so much, and have a great Labor Day weekend. I'll be around for a few more questions, and I'll play some music too.